Hi, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Sounds okay? Yeah? Great. Okay. I'm going to find my clicker here, and we're going to get going. So, I'm with Shopify, and I'm going to dive right into it here. So, in 1922, there was a boy born in Azinhaga, sort of central Portugal, to a family of landless peasants. And in a kind of like poetically fitting, you'll see why, kind of turn of events, he was named after this sort of family nickname. And this here is a wild radish. In Portuguese, this is a Saramago. So this is José Saramago. He's this pretty important figure to me. He's a Portuguese writer, and he was born to these peasant parents. His mom was illiterate. He hadn't owned a book until he was around 20 years old. And throughout his life, he taught himself at a very early age to be a car mechanic, and then later a translator, a bureaucrat, a newspaper editor, all kinds of stuff throughout his life. His first attempt at writing was this critical and commercial failure, a total flop. And throughout his life, he had a really hard time trying to make a living as a writer. So he would, of course, eventually go on to write these critically acclaimed and beautiful pieces of work like Blindness, The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, and then finally he'd win the Nobel Prize for Literature, there it is, in 1998. So you might be wondering now why I'm opening up a talk here for all of you today with this writer, José Saramago. So, surprise, I'm going to tell you. When I think about Saramago, I think about his path to success and to fulfillment in life. And you try and tug along these various threads, and the thing that really stands out to me is that he's got this passion for lifelong learning, right? So throughout his life, despite the pitfalls and the avenues that he took when he was moving through life, he was always learning. And I guess I should introduce myself now. So I think maybe the only parallel between me and this fella here is that we both kind of like to work on cars. That's probably where it ends. My name's Matty, as Courtney said. I've been running support, learning, and development at Shopify for the last few years. And prior to that, I worked directly in our frontline support teams while I was going to grad school and starting my family and all that kind of stuff. So now, as I've said, I lead all these support, learning, and development initiatives at Shopify. And maybe it's a little more of a stretch, but if I want to draw maybe another parallel between myself and this Saramago over here, it could be that we both have this circuitous path to where we got to in our careers and our lives, and we both have this passion for lifelong learning. And that's what brought me to the career that I have today. So I'm really opening with Saramago so that I can impress upon everybody here the importance that I place and that Shopify Support places on lifelong learning. And in enculturating a culture of lifelong learning, whether it's informal or formal, experiential, reflective, whatever you want to call it. And really acknowledging that learning is just something that's happening to us throughout our entire lives, okay? And the reason I want to bring that up is because once we start to acknowledge that truism, then we start to think about how that can affect the way we look at learning in our professional lives. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. So everybody in here knows, I'm going to assume, that Shopify's Guru team is considered one of the greatest support teams that are out there right now. Many of you have probably had the chance to interact with them, right? It's often touted by merchants, partners, developers as like one of the key differentiators, one of the best things about what we have to offer at Shopify, right? And we're really, really proud of having been able to get there. But we didn't just kind of like fall into that position, right? It took us a long time, and it was a long journey to get to that place. So as Shopify's grown and scaled, eked out the market share that we've eked out, we've also increased in complexity. Our product has grown and grown. Our team's gotten a lot bigger. And while that's happened, our support team has had to grow and adapt in order to serve in kind, right? So I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so talking about the challenges of rapid scaling in this complex environment. I'm going to talk about the lessons that we've learned in Shopify Support as we've scaled up to the degree that we have. And I'll talk about just how we scale that kind of team and the focus we put on learning and development. And I bring up Saramago, again, because I want to suggest to everybody here that learning and developing is non-linear, right? And that we can look at it without a fixed ending. And if we do that, then I think it's going to help us all along on our path to success, even in scaling. So for all you folks, it's scaling the organizations that you've got now. For me, it was scaling a support team and an L&D team at Shopify. For Saramago, it was the Nobel Prize. Who's going to rank those things? I don't know. But better yet, at the end of this talk, hopefully, I'm going to talk about Saramago, I'm going to talk about evolution, I'm going to talk about rocket ships. I like all those things. So, and by the end, hopefully, I'll impress upon everybody here the importance of this thesis, this statement here, which is that it's important to consider learning and development to be performance, not to be in service of performance in order to succeed. Cool? Cool. Okay, so the senior vice president of support at Shopify is this guy named Toby Shannon. He's a real character. And he often talks a lot about how our support organization is this 1,000-person pedagogical organization, right? So what does that mean? To me, a guy who runs a learning and development team, it means a big budget, I hope. But really, like more earnestly, what it means is that we're an organization that thrives or maybe even exists on, on knowledge, right? Like on the storage of knowledge, the effective transfer of knowledge, really the cultivation of knowledge. So this is why we're trusted as a support organization as a serious service differentiator. This is why we have strong data that can show that our performance indicators tend to improve once merchants have actually contacted our support team. If you think about it, my organization teaches gurus and other members of support how they can do their jobs, how they can develop into new roles, how they can lead teams, and all that kind of stuff. And they go on to teach their colleagues in this sort of recursive way. And all of them go on to teach merchants, partners, developers, and ultimately, they're helping everybody make more money, right? So if we boil the rest of it away, we come to understand that Shopify Support has thrived and is going to continue to thrive because everyone involved is to some degree a lifelong learner and a lifelong teacher. And we got that way, and we're going to stay that way, by considering learning and development to be performance, not to be in service of performance. So I'm going to speak a little bit more about what I think this distinction means as we go through this talk. So it's all well and good to consider that learning is important and that we need to place some focus on learning in our support teams or our organizations if we want to succeed, right? So I'm going to go ahead and assume that you all concede that point to me now. Learning is important, okay? If you don't, I'll be here all day. I'll be here all night. You come and find me. We'll drink a beer about it. I'll try and convince you. I'm pretty compelling. But anyway, for the sake of this talk, this is how it's going to go. But the question becomes, how do we do this as we scale? Okay? And by scale, I don't just mean growing in size. What I mean is about increasing in complexity. So this truism right here, I think this is something that's axiomatic. I think that as we get bigger and bigger, we just are going to increase in complexity. Okay? That's a struggle I think that we're all going to face. It's part and parcel with success, as far as I'm concerned. So it could be internal complexity, right? So as you're getting bigger and bigger, you're growing more teams, you're developing processes, you're having to have meetings and processes around things that you used to be able to sort out over like a foosball best of 3, something like that, right? Or it's external complexity, right? So you have more and more external integrations. All of a sudden you're relying on like third-party integrations to get stuff done, and things just become a lot more complex. But either way, whatever the locus of this complexity problem you're facing is, it's something that you're going to need to tackle in order to be successful. And so hopefully you're buying, I'm getting some feedback. Hopefully you're buying this one right now. But if you're not, I'm just going to start riffing on something that I think is pretty cool, and we can come back to this after. So with Saramago, I took you back, I don't know, to 1922, something like that. I'm going to go back a little bit further now, like 550 million years ago or so, a little bit further. With me? We all good? All right. So 550 million years ago, these sort of like photoreceptive blobs began to develop on these single-celled organisms, okay? So they were able to differentiate a little bit light from dark, and that's about all. But as sort of time went by, and during this time period called the Cambrian explosion, these photoreceptive blobs began to, get more complex. They began to develop the capacity to differentiate direction of light and dark, and so on. Whoops. So some of you who remember biology class might remember something along these lines. Forgive me for bringing up those memories, but bear with me as I talk you through it. I think you might see where I'm kind of going to go here. You have the complexity of these proto-eyes really evolving, okay? So as we move along, we get these cups, these recesses in the eye. That begins to differentiate direction, light and dark. Gets more and more complex over time as things evolve. After a few hundred millennia, we get to this place. After a few hundred millennia more, we get to this place, right? This is the human eye. We have this complex organ, like, millions of parts, 1 million nerve receptors going into the human brain, okay? So this is a significant evolution from a photoreceptive blob on a single-celled organism. Fair? Fair. Okay. So the prevailing theory with regards to how all this evolution went down is that the eye, or all of our sensory organs, evolved ahead of the brain. And the brain's evolution is sort of reliant on those sensory receptors being evolved, okay? And the theory goes that we didn't need the complexity of something like the human brain until we had complex information coming in order to necessitate it, okay? Those are the cliff notes. Those of you who actually study biology, feel free to talk to me about this later. I'm sure I could learn a thing or two. But for the sake of the metaphor, bear with me, okay? And so we end up with this complex human eye with over millions of working parts, all that kind of stuff. And it requires this equally complex organ, the brain, right, in order to process the information and carve out its evolutionary advantage. So if you indulge my metaphor here, I'm suggesting that we can look at this kind of evolution, this sort of symbiotic evolution, as a parallel for how we grow in the complex areas in our organizations, okay? So in Shopify's earliest days, some of you remember this? Anybody remember that? Shopify 1, okay? In our earliest days, this is where we were. Our support team was then one guy. You might have heard of him. His name's Toby Lukey. He was managing support for Shopify. And if you could, please don't tweet or tell in any other fashion Toby that I've now compared him to a patch of photoreceptive blob cells on a single-celled organism. Won't really work that well for my career. But nonetheless, see it through for the metaphor, right? As we developed and grew in complexity, so too did our support team, okay? So we developed card readers, Shopify 2, now just called Shopify. And at this stage, we grew our support organization into the hundreds of people. So now we're up here, right? Developing in complexity. We started to train a workforce like this that required this crack team of actual expert L&D people, not just, people picking up the phone, answering questions as best they could. We also moved our workforce to this sort of geographically disparate remote model. We have people all over the world at all time zones, and we've modeled it so that they can work during the daytime in their times, but serve 24 hours a day. So complexity is going up and up as we're figuring out how to train these people, how to build knowledge resources for these people that are accessible all the time, something that's sustainable, something that's secure, and something that makes sure that our merchants and our partners and our developers are able to get the answers they need all the time. Complexity is just increasing and increasing. So like I said, we did this by building a dedicated team of educators. We implemented cloud-based learning management system. We implemented a knowledge management system, and by using that, we meticulously documented all of our processes, all of our support issues, so that we wouldn't have to replicate the mistakes that we made, right? We built up techniques and systems that were steeped in learning and development and knowledge management best practices so that we could offer the best service and make commerce better for everybody. We grow even more. We have merchant counts now in the hundreds of thousands. We've got Shopify Plus. We've got beautiful card readers. We've got Shopify Flow, script editor, wholesale, Shopify Pay, all this great stuff you know about. The complexity for supporting this kind of product just goes through the roof, as I'm sure you can imagine, right? The amount of stuff that people have to know in order to be able to offer great support is just, it's gargantuan. So as we've grown from being this company with staff of a couple hundred people and a support team of a handful of people, to a company of many thousands of people and a support team of over 1,000 now, we've had to sort of eke out these ways to secure this competitive evolutionary advantage that I'm talking about. So we've created this team called the Product Support Network, and what they do is they actually embed into product teams, and they keep support and product communicating as we build new products, as we release new features, as we red team the kind of things that might go wrong when we release these products. We've set up these deliberate mechanisms in place so that we can prepare gurus prior to product releases so that they're ready to handle any support debt that might come up instead of being reactionary. We've built this dedicated learning material for our ancillary and supportive teams, like our escalated support teams and our risk operations teams and so on, so that everybody is using the same core knowledge management system, so the message is the same no matter who you're talking to. And all this complexity that we're having to deal with, it is very much a byproduct of success that I think everybody in here, if you're not already dealing with, you're going to get to deal with, and that's a fantastic byproduct of success. But what I'm saying here is that we have to be able to step to that challenge in order to really capitalize on it, okay? So we've gone from this simple commerce tool to this solution that makes commerce better for everybody. We've gone from this guy in a room to this geographically disparate, cognitively diverse team. We've gone from like YOLOing support to having a set of systems in place that are really built in order to have structure, replicability, and all that sort of stuff, right? And with all this, I can't really stress the message enough that the important thing that we've done here and the important takeaway here is that you can't let learning and development for this kind of thing fall by the wayside, right? If we don't prepare our people as we grow our organizations, if we don't keep ourselves prepared as we grow our organizations, we're going to fail, right? So it's easy to fall into the trap of not focusing on learning and development, right? You want to ship fast, right? You want to be first to market on things. You want to get out there and get things done, right? But particularly as you build up a team, and what I've discovered out of my direct experience is that you want to grow your teams with these like really capable, really engaged and energetic people. And those kinds of people are really interested in learning and development. They want to be engaged in their work. They want to be satisfied. They want to be excited. They want to grow. And so if we don't offer them learning and development potential, then we're not going to have the same kind of success. So what I'm recommending here is that as we grow our organizations, and if you want to build out successful support organizations, that you've really got to focus on making learning and development a part of performance, not just something that's in service of performance. Okay? So this kind of thing right here, it means we're not just sort of making growth like a bonus, right? We're building it in. We're making sure that personal and professional growth are a job expectation. We want to build these teams of these ambitious lifelong learners, and this is how we're going to satisfy them. This is how you're going to feed their need and satiate that thirst for knowledge that they all have. Okay? And this is going to help you, build teams. I'd argue that this is how we built a team that's second to none in support. So I'm going to go back just to this eye metaphor for a quick second. So we've evolved now. I'm not going to slide through the slides. You know what the eye looks like. We've evolved now to a place where we've eked out this evolutionary advantage, right? Some of the organisms that lost the race during this Cambrian explosion, they're not around anymore. They died out, right? Maybe they didn't make it all the way to cones and rods and color vision like we did. And I guess you could argue here that those of us here who are established or on the path to being established, we're the winners, right? Yay. We carved out that evolutionary advantage. We made it. We have the DNA that persists, and that's great. But we shouldn't rest on those laurels, right? We need to think about how we're going to keep growing in the future. We want to cement this success for the long term. And so in order to do that, I think that the key decision here is to take this metaphor and stop just being merely adaptive, but to be proactive. And so that's what we're trying to do in Shopify Support. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how. So we're looking ahead to the future. We're looking ahead to the challenges that we might face down the road, and we're trying to meet those head on. One of the ways we're doing that is we've implemented this program called Support Learning Code. It runs a number of programs all based around technical development for people who work in support. And the key one is we run a full stack 6-week boot camp for people who work at Shopify, where they get pulled out of their regular roles at full pay and put into an immersive 6-week program that we built ourselves. So it's all cultivated in-house. It's specific to Shopify problem solving, and it's really focused on developing people. This way our support team is going to help to grow, tackle the kind of problems that were previously left up to our engineering and development teams, and hopefully recursively share that knowledge with the people they work with and help to really build up the rest of the team by fostering this culture of knowledge and learning. We build this leadership training program. And this is a crash course. It's 1 week for anybody who takes over a team in support to make sure that they're equipped with the tools to build and scale and grow a team successfully. There's a lot of debate really in the corporate world, at least from what I've come to understand, about whether or not leadership training programs are effective. But our data really shows that the people who've gone through this or some other sort of preparatory model that we've put into place in support before they start leading a team have people who grow faster, who are more engaged, who are more satisfied at doing their work. And so this is really sort of putting our money where our mouths are in terms of making development like a key part of people's performance expectations. At the beginning of 2018, we're going to be launching this ongoing learning program, which is pretty cool. It's going to allow all the members of support to highlight these pathways of learning they're interested in. And then they can take those pathways for either professional or personal development. It's all going to be curated by our learning and development teams, and it's going to be accessible anywhere on any device at any time. And the idea here is that their leads and their coaches are going to be encouraging them to follow those pathways in order to develop. And not just encouraging them, but setting the expectation that in order to succeed, they're going to need to enroll, they're going to need to grow their skill sets and have some demonstrable growth. So it's making learning and development a piece of performance instead of just something that's in service to performance or a path to promotion, right? And finally, we've invested in micro-learning tools, which are pretty exciting and cool. We have these small little bite-sized tidbits of information. It's kind of like a drip campaign of knowledge that we feed to our support team. And the whole model is this just-in-time training model. And it's pretty cool. There's this sort of like algorithmic model that our service uses to see when people are requiring this information and how difficult they rate that information. And then based on that sort of feedback model, it continues to feed them quizzes and knowledge bumps and that kind of stuff as they do their work. It's all very contextual, really, really cool stuff. So all this stuff is keeping up to date, it's growing skills, it's maintaining the ability to provide service at the high level that we're used to. And it's fundamentally putting our money where our mouth is with regards to this statement right here. Okay? So, this is where we're at. You've decided to buy what I'm selling here. You know that learning and development is super important. Fostering this culture of lifelong learning and growth is key to success. I'm going to assume you're saying yes. You know that as you grow and scale, complexity increases, and that's a tough thing to challenge, and we've got to tackle that head on. But, maybe I'm almost done here. Maybe you guys are convinced, and I've done my job. But I don't think it would be complete without a bit of a cautionary tale, so I'm going to give you one of those next. And I've jumped around in time a bit. I'm going to jump around in time one more time here. And I'm going to take you to the 1960s. Okay? Some of you might be familiar with this tale, but I'm going to spin it anyways. So in the 1960s, NASA, they were engaged in the big space race, and they developed this pretty fantastic rocket called the Saturn V. And the Saturn V is here. It's big. Still the biggest and most powerful rocket that has ever been developed for spacefaring. It's what got the Americans to the moon. It's what got the first US space station set up, Skylab. It was just considered a real winner in the 1960 space race, okay? And I'm just gonna go ahead and pause for a second and say rockets are really cool. I've been reading about them and they're fantastic. And if any of you are rocket nerds, kudos. And you'll know then that the Apollo is a 3-stage rocket, right? Everybody knows Apollo's a 3-stage rocket. So this is the Saturn V Apollo mission. The rocket came in 3 stages. Now what's interesting here is that each of these 3 pieces of this massive rocket, this 16 million pound massive $25 billion machine, was built somewhere different, right? So stage 1, built in New Orleans. Stage 2, built in Seal Beach, California. Stage 3, Huntington Beach, California. The instrument and telemetry models, the guidance and navigation, built by IBM in Huntsville. And then finally, it was all put together by these engineers at Kennedy Space Center. And then they shot it into space, which is pretty fantastic, right? But you can think of some of the implications. You might start to see where I'm going here. So, I can barely build IKEA furniture. So the idea of taking all this stuff from these disparate places and putting it together is pretty fantastic. Also, I'm in love with this Apollo logo. This is the logo from their program, and it's just great, right? But the interesting thing here is that when the program ended, all these factories, the ones in Louisiana and the 2 in California, they were either retasked or they were shut down completely, right? So all the technicians and engineers, they either went on to do other things. By now, they've either, unfortunately, died or retired. All the tools, the jigs, everything they used to make all the machine parts for these rockets, they were scrapped. Don't need them anymore, right? And so what NASA came to realize was that, in a point of reflection, that there was really no long-term lasting collective memory of this project, right? So they had taken all the plans from these disparate places. They had paper plans. They had built them all into microfiche. Then they scrapped the plans. Well, the microfiche didn't last. It's all been degraded. You can't use it. They can't figure out the plans for this thing anymore. So even the engineers that they sent to actually go into these rocketry museums and take apart the F-1 rockets, these big things on the bottom of this thing here, they kind of got it, but there are parts in there that they just can't make anymore. There's idiosyncratic sort of mistakes that they make when they're hand fashioning rocket engines that just don't exist anymore because, well, computers, right? And so we've got this apocryphal version of this story where NASA puts $25 billion into a program, they managed to get themselves to the moon, and now they're totally screwed, right? Can't do it again. And that's the apocryphal version. It's not entirely true, right? There are people who can solve this problem. But it does lead to a kind of truism, which is like, it's going to be infinitely more work and massively more expensive to try and re-engineer a rocket like this than just relying on the knowledge that we already had, right? So this tale is actually employed by knowledge management professionals and by NASA when they talk about their current knowledge management program to say, like, don't do what we did. We messed up, right? So take just a second to think of that implication with your own organizations at a different set of scale, right? You can't rely on the fact that you had success at a particular moment in time. It doesn't necessarily belie that you're going to have success later. And it certainly doesn't mean that if you put a whole bunch of money into a project and get to the moon first, that you're going to be able to do it again just because you did it the first time, right? So I know that Shopify and all of your organizations are a little bit different. As I said, we have computational models. We have a history and a record of the things that we've done. I don't know, maybe it's just Google Docs, but we have it, right? But still, the metaphor of the rocket, it's a pretty powerful one. Like Shopify, we mobilize this metaphor all the time. We say we're on a rocket ship. And maybe it's about the sort of the crazy sort of trajectory that we're on or the excitement of being along for the ride. But it's a powerful metaphor too if we think about it in the negative sense, if we think about it in terms of this tale, right? So we can say that if Saturn V has taught us anything, it's that without a strategy to manage our knowledge, then we're going to be unable to capitalize on our past successes. So Shopify Support went ahead and placed a pile of focus on a culture of lifelong learning, collecting information, and good knowledge management practices so that we could avoid falling into this trap. We implemented a knowledge management tool. It's aptly called Get Guru. If you know the name of our support team, this makes sense. It's pretty great. It offers the whole support team just enough information at just the right time, just when they need it, and nothing more. So they access it, they get what they need, and then they get out. It's a pretty powerful tool. And we've managed to sort of deprecate all these sort of like undernets of knowledge sharing that exist as your information organizations grow, right? People, it's always best intentioned, but people build their own knowledge sharing devices, but they're not the kind of things that you can sustain. So we've deprecated those and built them into this. But what's key and what's super important here is that we did this without hamstringing the collective nature of knowledge sharing. So gurus are the ones who go in here and update things. Gurus are the ones who make sure that this knowledge is cultivated and accurate and up to date, the people who actually face the problems on the front line. And by making sure that's the model, we've ensured that people are really invested in this knowledge sharing culture, in this culture of learning and development, right? So another thing we've done is we've worked hard to foster this direct connection between all the teams who collect and capture and distribute knowledge and then build bridges between them. So that product support network that I talked about before, our knowledge management teams, our public docs teams, I'm sure you've all accessed our public docs many times, our learning and development teams, we all fall under the same umbrella at Shopify so that we're all communicative, and when we roll one thing out, that information is consistent across all of our messaging, which is really powerful, and it's not where we used to be, but I highly recommend it. So here we go. You know what that is. We've done all this stuff. We've created this model where we have all these people sharing all this powerful information. We've gotten out in front of the possibility of losing our information. And we've really built a structure to make sure that learning and development stays as a part of people's job expectations, not as an afterthought or not as a method to accelerate through their careers, okay? So I'm just about done here. I'm excited. I'm gonna get out of the way. We're gonna turn the stage over to all of you folks. I'm really excited to hear the rest of the talks. But before I do, I just want to bring it back here one more time. Okay? As your organizations are all gonna grow, right? You're gonna face the problems of complexity. You're gonna face the issues of scale. I'm gonna just go ahead and say it one more time. It's imperative that you stay on top of knowledge management. Implementing a knowledge management strategy, even at a small scale, is fundamentally important in order to success in the long term. You want to protect against knowledge loss as you grow your teams. People are going to move from team to team. People are going to leave, and then they'll take that knowledge with them. So you want to curate and collect that knowledge. You want to put it somewhere that's accessible and searchable, right? So your team has access to it. You want to get involved in the sharing of tacit knowledge. So you don't want to shut that kind of thing down. And as you grow, you move from this explicit knowledge, just writing everything down and sticking it in a binder somewhere, to sharing experiential knowledge, right? You want to develop these communities of practice, put together work groups so that people can share their experiences, and then somehow collect and cultivate that so people can access that knowledge long term. This way, people are going to be able to sort of glean a sense of the bigger picture here, right? So in a blue sky world, we've got New Orleans, Seal Beach, Huntsville, Huntington Beach, Kennedy Space Center, all working together, right? Rather than being these disparate and discrete units, right? So, just about out of time here. So, I'm excited to get out of the way. Like I said, I can't wait to hear everybody else's talks, but I do want to hit this message one more time. The key thesis here that I'm going to put forward, and the thing that we've done that's led us to success in Shopify Support, is that we flip the model and consider learning and development to be a part of people's performance. We set that expectation in their work, and then we follow through on those expectations as we performance manage people. And I would argue that this has been the key competitive advantage. This has been the differentiator that's helped us to get to where we are, and I couldn't recommend it more. So thanks very much for listening to my talk, and I hope you enjoy your day with Shopify today. Thank you.